The CCSK body of knowledge is split up into a number of domains, and in this unit I will talk you through all of those domains one by one. The first domain is obviously cloud computing concepts, and it introduces really the definition of cloud, largely based on the NIST definitions. What it adds is a bit of a discussion on the way that this changes security responsibilities across the supply chain in a way. Domain 2 dives into more the managerial stuff, governance and enterprise risk management. It describes how cloud computing should be approached from your existing governance and risk management so that it maximally aligns with business objective. What is the company trying to do and how does cloud computing fit into that? Now, as a result of this analysis, you will probably find out that governance and risk management on IT wasn't as good at it as it was supposed to be. So there are some specific topics and subtopics that describe how, for specific service models and deployment models, those processes might need to be adapted. Domain 3 takes a legal perspective. So there's a couple of things here. There's jurisdiction, there's contract law, there's other legal requirements, as well as interactions with law enforcement that are relevant in the cloud computing concept, that in the cloud computing context, and that are different because of the fact that you're outsourcing partly. One particular detail that's given attention, about 1 or 2 pages, is the European Union GDPR, the General Directive, the General Data Protection Regulation, and this is going to be the core of let's say IT security compliance or legalization across the world, really. But that's a different topic. Domain 4 is about compliance and audit management. So it dives into what kind of compliance obligations are there. For example, PCI DSS for credit card management. And how can you demonstrate that the solutions that you have as a company are actually compliant with respect to those regulations. And this is typically done through audits. So it dives into audits as well a little bit. Information governance, domain 5, it's a fairly short domain. It talks about the way that you sort of structure your controls around data. And the main tool here is the data lifecycle to help you understand data controls and information flows. Domain 6, the management plane and business continuity. So the management plane is something that you have access to on basically all cloud providers, or at least your version of the management plane. And you need to protect that. So it's so important that it has almost its own domain. For some reason, business continuity in the face of cloud provider failure is also added into this domain, presumably because the management plane gives you the best perspective on that. I think it's a different subtopic, but that's up for your opinion then. Domain 7, infrastructure security. This includes compute, storage, networking, and all of these are software defined, so that's really different from a more traditional IT environment. And that's what this domain explains, and it also explains how controls shift around that. Closely related to domain 7 is domain 8, virtualization and containers. This is more specifically about technologies that you use in a cloud context, whether it's private, hybrid, or public, to allow multiple workloads to coexist on the same underlying, let's say, processors or even storage. And this changes traditional security controls, and this domain goes into a lot more detail on that. Now we're moving into a different territory with incident response. Now, incident response is more an operational thing in my mind, but you need to prepare for that. And domain 9 elaborates on how does incident response change when you're actually working across an IT supply chain, where all kinds of partners have a role both as a provider and as a consumer. And this domain explains that fairly well, although in my own training material I have pointers to even further and more interesting discussions. Domain 10, application security. This used to be a fairly old school application thing like web security, but in version 4 this has actually been adapted and updated significantly. And it talks about how do you organize application security. And it's not just plain old vanilla web application security, it's about organizing application security across a supply chain. And one of the more interesting bits here is how DevOps impacts security, the new risks that it brings, but also the tremendous opportunity that it brings to make applications, if you're responsible for developing applications, even more secure. Domain 11, data security, most of which is about encryption, but not exclusively so, talks about specific data security controls. Encryption, as I said, is a more important component of that, but there are some others, such as data leakage prevention, tokenization. Of course, data encryption at scale, which is what you want to do in a cloud world, has some implications on key management, to put it, let's say, politely. Domain 12, identity entitlement and access management. The big thing here is federated identity and access management. And in a way, that's a new technology. Cloud is actually not that much new technology, but federated identity management is definitely one of them. And this domain, it describes what it is, how you should approach it, and how you should take a more governance inspired perspective on identity and access management. Basically, you need to rip it out of the applications, or at least large parts of it need to be ripped out of individual applications. Then domain 13, security as a service. Interestingly, uh, while historically we said cloud's not so secure, so we need to fix that, now it's sometimes the other way around, where you could use services in the cloud to implement better security controls than the ones you would be able to do on your own. You know, email spam filtering and malware filtering is just a very simple old school example, but there are definitely more. And version 4 of the CCSK guidance, or the CSA guidance, is actually a lot more detailed than version 3 of the guidance. That was almost incomprehensibly abstract. So version 4 is actually much more, let's say, practical in that sense. And the final domain of the guidance is what's called related technologies. This includes big data, Internet of Things, mobile and serverless computing, although serverless computing is also touched upon in some of the other domains. And this domain simply explains what they are and what their security implications are. Moving outside of the guidance, we are going into the cloud controls metrics. This is a fairly huge document, and hundreds of cloud providers around the world are using that. So more than 100 controls, most of them specifically for cloud computing. It maps fairly straightforwardly to the guidance. I think I should have to make a new count, but I think like half of the areas of the CCM are one-to-one mapped to domains in the guidance. It used to be more in version 3, but the CCM is probably going to be updated somewhere in the near future. So what the CCSK exam tests for is not all those controls. What it really does is to see if you have a basic understanding of the structure of that CCM. And as the exam is open book, you don't have to memorize this anyway. And the last but not least component is the ENISA document, still going strong even though it was produced years ago. It lists 35 risk categories, and most of them are cloud related, and the others are definitely relevant for cloud, but they will sort of fall upon the responsibility of a, let's say, infrastructure provider or even a data center provider. The nice and the interesting thing about the ENISA document is that some industry regulations specifically refer to these risk categories, and a certain national bank regulators come to mind with that. Now this concludes a fairly longish summary of really what is the core of cloud security. So in a way, if you understand this, then you know what the scope of CCSK is about.